If we push in the right spots, then we've moved things to the breaking point. Then the future becomes fluid and change is possible. History isn't a primed tapestry that we've got to suffer, a closed world of no exit. We can form it, make it. We just have to choose to make it. Hello and welcome to the channel, or perhaps welcome for the very first time. Either way, I really hope you enjoy what I'm going to be talking about, which is a review of Babel by R.F. Kuang. So this is historical fantasy with kind of that dark academia vibe, and as I said, historical fantasy, so it is set in the real world in Victorian society, so a bit of historical fiction as well. It's got those historical elements at the forefront, but yes, there are fantastical elements as well, which I will talk about. But before I get into that, I'm just going to talk a bit about the blurb and the premise of this book. Babel is the world's centre of translation and, more importantly, of silverworking, the art of manifesting the meaning lost in translation through enchanted silver bars to magical effect. Silverworking has made the British Empire unparalleled in power, and Babel's research in foreign languages serves the Empire's quest to colonise everything it encounters. So I was really hooked by that premise, and I hope that you are as well. I thought it'd be really interesting combining those different aspects that you usually don't find together, looking at historical fantasy but set in Victorian England, specifically mostly in Oxford University, and also looking at those aspects of conflict of identity study, those dark academia vibes, as I said before. I just thought it'd be really interesting, especially when combined with Rebecca F. Kuang's writing, because I have read her debut, The Poppy War. I didn't quite click on it on every level, but I definitely thought she was a fantastic writer, and here I'm very happy to say that she has honed her craft, in my opinion, and especially improved on her character work, because that was one of the strongest elements of this story, and I felt so invested in those characters, as I will talk about now. But yeah, I'm going to give a full overview of my thoughts of Babel, and so yeah, let's begin. This is a story of so many layers, which I absolutely love. So on one level, this is a story of friendship, camaraderie, relying on others and feeling that kind of identity in the group. So as I said before, Robin Swift is taken from his home at a young age, and he's very isolated in his childhood until he goes to Oxford University, where he is enrolled in Babel, which is the translation branch of Oxford University. But there are only 4 students in that year group, Robin Swift being one of them, and so he becomes very close, or has to know and spend a lot of time with the other 3 students, who are Rami, Victoire and Letty, who I may be mispronouncing their names slightly. But yeah, so he's put in with these 4 characters, and they have very different backgrounds, conflicting ideologies, at times very different contrasting personalities. But I absolutely love that despite all of this, they are put into something really difficult together. They all go through their different challenges, and I absolutely loved how Rebecca F. Kuang showed that despite their differences, they really rely on each other. They are rocks for the other people, and I thought it was a brilliant investigation of kind of that growing bond of friendship, the impact it has on you, and how important it is to have friendship. We see how much Robin Swift just loves this, and that it really means so much to him, and he will do anything for his friends. And that's quite a beautiful aspect to the book, that this is one filled with tragedy, but that is one of the elements I absolutely loved, and it gave you moments of joy as well, which yeah, Rebecca F. Kuang did a great job at. And I absolutely love, as I said, how they have this really unique dynamic which grows, evolves, changes over time depending on what happens to them. It just felt real and vivid to a level that is very rare to find in books, but Rebecca Kuang did an absolutely incredible job with Babel. I also really enjoyed how R.F. Kuang looks at that conflict of identity. Robin Swift is of Chinese descent, and he's taken from Canton at a very young age, and as I said, put in that world of isolation. So when he is enrolled in Oxford University, he has this conflict of identity and also his conscience as well. He knows that Babel serves the crown, and the sole purpose of them basically is to find ways to further the efficiency and speed that Britain can assimilate the colonies it's taken control of and expand its borders. And this is done through the magical aspects in some ways, which is, as I said, those silver bars in the premise it tells you, and these really work through the power of language. I'll talk a bit about that later on. But yes, so Robin Swift knows that whilst he absolutely adores Oxford University, he loves the place, he loves study, he feels like he's got a purpose, identity and belonging with his friends. He also feels that conflict of this is not really where he belongs. He is still looked down upon in a society of Victorian England, which is at its core very, very racist due to the hegemonic values permeating at that time. It talks about slavery just recently being abolished, so there's a lot of philosophical things there, a lot about kind of those ideologies and conflicting with other characters in this book, and it really lends to the character of Robin Swift and how he reacts to all that and how he views himself as well. It's very tragic at times, but it feels very real and vivid. And yeah, that conflict of identity was really interesting. And looking at conscience as well, the theme of conscience. What can we do? Should we do it? How do we decide where we belong? And what will the repercussions be? That was a driving point of this story. I thought it was really engaging. Robin Swift, you totally understand him. You see he makes mistakes and you're kind of wanting to shake him at times and get into the page and tell him to do something else, but it just all feels very real. And yeah, I thought it was another brilliant aspect to this story, that you have that level of friendship and then the conflict of identity and conscience, and then you've also got his relationship with his adoptive father, Professor Lavelle. He's a very distant figure, quite cold. All he kind of wants is for Robin Swift to learn his languages. He's not really a father as adopting someone would suggest, but how their relationship plays out is really interesting. And you see that this really does build over time. Whilst it's quite an intimate story, it does get a bit more epic in the end, more grand, and the ending is absolutely brilliant. It's a climactic cataclysm of an event that really was shocking, and there's so many twists and turns in this story which took me by surprise. It just felt absolutely mind-blowing, and I was really captured, enraptured from the beginning to the very end. I think I said in my The Wolf Den review that it's kind of a common saying now to say, oh, I was hooked from page 1 to the very end, when really you're not. But in this, that really was the case. From the very first page, the beautiful writing, the event that occurs, I just thought it was really great to launch a story. And Babel kept hold of my attention until the very end. There's so many different layers, but they all clicked with me in the themes they were exploring and also the way it was written. This is a book mainly told from the perspective of Robin Swift. There are 3 chapters which are told from someone else, but they're quite small chapters, and it's mainly about Robin Swift and seeing the world through his eyes. But this is also told in omniscient narration, and I thought it was very clever how Rebecca Kuang takes us through the story chronologically in a linear way, but there are some little asides of the narration which really add a melancholic edge to the story and also a sense of dread. I'm just going to read an example out. These truly were the last of the golden days. There would be a time when they had to face up to their very real differences. So yeah, that line is just one example. That is told in a moment of joy of this friendship together, and that line really just brings you back into this story you just feel isn't going to end very happily, or at least there's going to be some tragic circumstances along the way, which there are. This is not a story for happy reading. There are, of course, happy moments, and I really love how Rebecca Kuang really presented that full scope of human life, where you see the joy, happy moments, even amongst so much trauma and tragedy which occurs. But we, of course, see these sad and tragic moments as well, and that really full scope is a real roller coaster of a ride emotionally, and how engaged I was really surprised me. I was so invested in these characters, so whatever happened to them, I felt deeply affected by it. So when they had those happier moments, I felt elated, but then little asides of the narration, which were used sparsely but expertly, really just brought me back to knowing, oh no, and I just felt this sense of dread, which really permeated the entire book, that kind of knowledge that these characters are not going to end happily. They may have happy moments, but they're in a society which they're being used as pawns to further the British Empire, and that is basically their sole purpose, and you really see how that plays out. I thought it was done really brilliantly. Now I want to talk about how Babel presents a beautiful, thought-provoking conversation on the power of language, and I mean this in 2 senses. First up, I want to talk about how R.F. Kuang uses her prose and her language, how she alters and manipulates it to really affect the tone and atmosphere, and she does this through symbolism, motifs, and much more, just through her phrasing. There is a very melancholic edge to the story, as I said, and it's because I think it's a bit similar to what I may have said. I think I may have left it out by accident in my review of Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker, that the traumatic events and the terrible events are told in a way where they're almost at some points just told in the same way that anything else would be said, that we would just say something normally. And it really just shows that this sense that those ideas that are permeating this period, that the racism that Robin Swift faces and the sexism with other characters, and this kind of just the hegemonic values permeated by the British Empire at this period really affects the characters. But you see how it's just they're used to it as well, which is so tragic, so sad, and that is really emphasised through the use of prose. And R.F. Kuang does a great job of using beautiful language to show these characters' emotions, but also showing really how they're affected by things that happen around them, or not affected because they're so used to it, or how they just take it in their stride and they're used to it, which is really upsetting. And yeah, this is quite a hard-hitting book in many ways because of those themes that really play into major roles in the story. But it's one that I definitely say still read if you're in the kind of that right frame of mind. And yeah, that is one way in which this really shows the power of language. Now on to the second sense that I think Rebecca Kuang really uses the power of language and shows that as a major theme in Babel. So this is historical fantasy, and their fantastical element stems from the use of silver bars, which really is used to power the British Empire at this time. So the silver bars work through, you have to have one word on one side in one language and one word in another language, which means something similar. So say you had a word in English on one side of the bar and on the other a word in Chinese, and the difference in definition, which still has to be quite close together, really impacts how these bars affect what they apply to. It can affect the beauty, aesthetic, speed, strength, or efficiency of whatever they are applied to. So you can really see how these can be used to really power an empire, and that is what is explained as powering the British Empire, making it so dominant. But at the heart of this, you see that it is language which is at the core of the British Empire, and it really takes that saying knowledge is power as a driving force of the story, and it shows that the power of language really is at the centre of everything that Britain is doing at this time and what Babel is about. And I thought that this was really portrayed brilliantly through the perspective of Robin Swift, because he loves to study and he feels this passion for trying to find combinations which can be used to enhance certain objects through the use of these silver bars and this magical influence on the world. But whilst he absolutely loves the study, he hates what they will facilitate in terms of the repercussions on the globe as a whole, and how the British Empire will of course use them to assert its dominance and try and take away the freedom and influence of others. So you really feel that contrast of that this is not being done maliciously, where a lot of the professors and the students just really love to study, but you see how everything is kind of used as a weapon, and it is really just tainted and corrupted for the use of those in charge, who they will use anything to gain more wealth. And you really see avarice as a key theme in Babel as well, and I thought it really brilliantly all links back when you think of it to the power of language. The friendship that these friends have together is because they're being enrolled at Babel, and because they understand each other, because they're working on the same course, which is all about languages. And then you see that the silver working, that's through the power of language. The power of the British Empire, it all comes back to language, and I thought that was very beautifully done in a way that was quite symbolic, but in a way that really enhanced the story instead of detracting from it. Babel really takes so many things from identity, purpose, friendship, the power of language, colonisation, power, and so much more in what I thought was an absolutely beautiful book. And it is set in, of course, a Victorian setting, begins in 1828. I thought it was fantastic how vivid and alive this setting feels. That you can tell R.F. Kuang did a lot of research. He conducted so much research into bringing this setting alive with the technology that's used and how the world grows at this time. And yes, there is a bit at the beginning where Rebecca Kuang says some books that she read, and you see how it really affects the vernacular as well, where it is very accessible, but there are slight differences which seem a little bit alien to how we talk today, but it's still very recognisable as the English language as we know it today. But we see how it's evolved, and again linking back to language, and we really see how society has changed in this time. And I thought that the setting really brilliantly reflects the themes of the story, and also the characters actually feel like they're living in that period, because often in historical fiction it feels like, yes, the setting feels real, but the characters, I feel like they could exist today the way they're acting. But in this sense it really didn't. They feel like a product of the time, and you really see how everything just feels very thought through. What they know about is through the different media that they would be able to learn from, and I thought it was very interesting in that way, and you see that really reflected in the personalities of the characters. So this was a book that I thought was absolutely brilliant. It was very engaging, immersive, and I thought it brought a lot of insight into the themes that it really combats in this book. It was very beautiful. It brought tears to my eyes, so it was emotionally moving as well. And when a book does that, you know that you're engaged and invested. And what more can you ask for than that? I thought it had really authentic feeling characters in a vibrant world that showed both a wide scope on humanity, from some of the heroic aspects to the depravities as well. And I thought that it was really interesting in showing that full scope. It didn't just focus on one thing. It just feels like it's captured an element of life. And whilst it does get escalate from more of an intimate story at the beginning to something grander, it really keeps that heart at the core of the story. And so yeah, Babel, I'd highly recommend it to everyone. This is a recently released standalone by Rebecca F. Kuang, and I thought it was absolutely fantastic historical fantasy, which does a great job at executing everything it seems like it's set out to accomplish. So I really hope that you enjoyed this review. I hope that maybe it's given a bit of insight into what you may enjoy about this, or maybe whether it's not a book for you. But personally, I absolutely love Babel, and I'd highly recommend it. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below if you have read it, or let me know if you're going to read it. But yes, thank you so much for watching. If you've stuck with me to the end, I've been harking on far too long. But yes, that is Babel. Hopefully you enjoyed. Stay safe.